Over 260 Ukrainian soldiers have surrendered. They'd been holed up in a steelworks in the southern city of Mariupol for weeks. It ends the longest siege of the war so far and puts Russia in full control of the key city. Russia's already taken hundreds of the fighters, some severely wounded, to territory held by its forces. The Kremlin says they'll be treated in accordance with international agreements.
The Russian Defense Ministry says these pictures show Mariupol fighters undergoing inspection before being evacuated. Dozens of wounded troops have been taken from Mariupol to hospital in the Russian-controlled town of Novoazovsk in the Far East. Some 200 others were transferred north to Olenivka in Russian-backed separatist territory. Several hundred Ukrainian soldiers could still be inside the Azovstal steel plant. Kyiv says it wants to get them out alive.
We hope to save the lives of our boys. Among them are heavily wounded. They are being treated. I want to underline Ukraine needs its Ukrainian heroes alive. This is our principle. The work continues to bring our boys home, and it requires delicacy and time.
In Kyiv, many Ukrainians are skeptical about Russia's pledge to treat Ukrainian soldiers in line with international norms.
Nothing good will come of it. We don't know how they will be treated. Actually, we do know. What we have already seen in Bucha, Irpin, and in other towns. It probably isn't very good. But if there's no other way, the soldiers can be saved later.
Russian-backed separatists have released this video, which they say shows them patrolling the Azovstal steelworks on Tuesday. It, like the rest of Mariupol, is largely in ruins. The city's loss is a major symbolic blow for Ukraine, and one that came at a heavy price for both sides.
Fanny Facha is in Kyiv for us. I asked her whether Ukraine is expecting to release Russian prisoners as part of the deal.
What we know at this point is that actually Ukraine is trying to get more soldiers out of the Azovstal steel plant. There's no information when that prisoner swap is going to take place. In fact, people here in Ukraine are wondering whether it's going to take place at all. If they listen to the debate going on there in Russia, some lawmakers basically are calling for these evacuated Azovstal soldiers from the Azov regiment, that they have to be brought to justice, basically, that they do not, quote, deserve to live. Also, the Justice Ministry in Russia basically calls on the Supreme Court right now to declare that the Azov regiment is a terrorist organization. As a result, clearly, people here in Ukraine, ordinary people, are quite skeptical that there's going to be a prisoner swap, and they're actually quite worried when it comes to the safety of those who are already out of the Azovstal steel plant. What is really their fate? Now, we have to zoom in a little bit on the history of the Azov regiment, because part of the truth is also that when this military unit started as a volunteer militia 8 years ago, the leader at that time was harboring quite radical views. But President Zelensky says, and kept saying, when he was asked about the Azov regiment and their meaning today, he said that they've been reformed. They are no longer radical. In fact, they should be viewed as heroes who were the last defenders of Mariupol for more than 80 days, basically trying to win time for Ukrainian forces to advance in other parts of the country. But it remains a controversial unit nonetheless, and the question is whether that controversy that Russia took as a pretext to invade Ukraine, what that's going to mean in terms of whether the Ukrainian soldiers are going to stay alive or not. We do not know.
And Fanny, what's happening to those soldiers who weren't able to leave the steel plant at all?
Well, the Kremlin basically says that Putin guarantees that everyone who surrenders is going to be treated according to international law. But what about those who did not surrender yet? That's exactly what also the sister of one of the soldiers is wondering about today, as she does not know about the fate of her brother, 26-year-old young man who's been basically a lawyer before joining the Azov regiment, because he's a patriot. That's what his sister says. But what's going to happen to him now? Is he going to make it out of there alive? Let's have a look at the report.
For Natalia, the war in Ukraine has been a time of intense worry and reflection. She's thinking a lot about her younger brother these days.
This is my brother Artem at school when he was 8 or 9.
Natalia recalls a very normal childhood growing up in Mykolaiv in southern Ukraine.
I always considered Artem to be a creative person and that he would go down a more creative path. I never thought he'd become a soldier.
But when the war in Donbass began in 2014, Natalia says Artem changed.
He knew that sooner or later the aggressor will bring war to our country, and he knew that he needed to prepare.
Artem was 26, joined the Azov regiment a few years ago. It was formed as a volunteer militia group and later became part of the National Guard. He's still holed up here in the Azovstal steel plant, the last holdout of Ukraine's forces in the port city of Mariupol. The regiment released these pictures displaying the horrible conditions some of their fighters are in. Putin accuses the unit of being Nazis. He's justified his invasion by claiming that Ukraine needs, in his words, denazifying, which has drawn a backlash globally. Here in Kyiv, the unit is seen as heroes. Billboards have sprung up supporting the soldiers.
I am expressing huge gratitude for them for standing for us, for our Ukraine. For Putin, as for every Russian, every Ukrainian is radical. But we only want to live on our own, and we strive to speak our own language. And every Azov soldier is a Ukrainian.
Vyacheslav Likachev researches right-wing groups. He says it's correct that the founders of Azov harbored neo-Nazi views, but insists that's changed now.
All those guys who were interested in politics more than in military action, they gone from the battalion and regiment after first several months of its existing in 2014.
Natalia doesn't want to get into Azov's controversial past. She's more worried for her brother, Artem.
Here he was texting me that he's alive, and that's it. He writes very short messages, unfortunately.
Holding on to signs of life and hoping her brother will return alive.
Funny, since you filmed with Natalia, have you had an update from her?
She's basically saying that she's appealing to the Pope to help her brother being released safe and sound from the Azovstal steel plant. And in fact, she was suggesting would have been much better if Turkey would have extracted these soldiers and these soldiers would go to Turkey as long as the war rages on. But clearly, this is not the playbook that's currently unfolding here, as Russia and Ukraine agreed for this on this prisoner swap. Only nobody knows whether that's actually going to take place.
Okay, time will see. Fanny Fachai, our correspondent in Ukraine, in the capital, Kiev, thank you very much for the update.